Hello, everyone, and welcome to another. I have to say, this is going to be a very impressive episode of Sphere of Being because the special guest today comes with us armed with a wealth of corporate experience. He is from a company that he owns and has founded called Future Perfect, where he helps CEOs to grow and also helps people to become portfolio executives, especially in the transition between their current career and moving to the future. What he enables people to do at the highest level within business is to create the environment and hold space for them to be the people that actually they always knew that they could be, and to perhaps eliminate some of the toxicity, the anxiety, to be able to work with freedom and joy instead of toil and I was going to say soil, but I'm going to think I'm going to say toil and slavery. There was a tongue twister. And it's very much to actually help people to reach their full potential and enjoy life because we do things for a reason and sometimes we forget that reason. And it's always nice to hold it close to us. And also for the purposes of the leadership and making sure that you're operating in the right environment is very much centered on the strength of the love that we can bring to our team. And people think that's a strange word to use, perhaps in business, but it is a very strong and powerful emotion that can be warrior. It can also be peacekeeper and all of those wonderful things attached to it. So today it is absolutely a privilege and a pleasure to welcome Charles McLachlan to the stage, to the floor of Sphere of Being podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Deborah. And it's been fascinating following some of your journey over the last couple of years as I see you evolving what you're doing. So that's been very exciting.
Oh, thank you so much. And I set this up from lived experience because I was a person that didn't have a voice. I used to adopt personas in my business. I've had a successful career in corporate, but it actually drew me to a nervous breakthrough, which was wonderful. But it's wonderful not to have to go through that to end up being the person that you knew you were always meant to be. So it's lovely that you can actually help the people because it can get pretty tricky at the top. One of the things I'd like you to delve into, if that's okay, Charles, is to think of the reasons why you've set up the business and what value do you have for your clients?
Yes. So it's been quite an interesting process because I came up with the name Future Perfect because I felt that what I wanted people to be able to do was in the future to look back on their lives so far and believe that that was everything that it could have been. So, for those of you who are grammarians, you'll know that future perfect is that tense where you say it will have been. Um, and then I had this sort of moment of inspiration where I thought, actually, where does this make the most impact on people? It's their working lives. Now, yes, people's home lives are important, but for so many of us, most of our waking life is spent at work. So I thought, if you want to have the ability to have future perfect, then actually it's all about making your future work. And it's the sense of, so is your future going to be working for you? But also, are you going to take control of what you work on in the future? And I started out noticing that too many CEOs founded businesses and they thought that the business was going to serve them, but they ended up being enslaved to the business. And when I started to build up the CEO growth economy, sorry, the CEO growth academy, there was very interesting the people who started to get involved. So these were committed, energetic, entrepreneurial people. But some of them came because their business partners had sent them because they were really worried about whether this person was going to survive their passion to build this business at any cost. And I had one guy who spoke to me and said, look, I've got this fantastic business partner, but I think he's burning himself out. And he won't listen to me. I've asked him to talk to an industrial psychologist. He won't listen to them. I asked him to talk to his doctor. He won't listen to them. But you, Charles, you're saying, I'm going to help you to build your business faster and better and help you to grow faster and better. He can buy into that because there's no shame in joining a CEO growth group. But when he came, what happened was very quickly, the other people in the group got him to reflect on how he was destroying himself. And the miracle was, after he'd been with us for less than 3 weeks, he decided he was going to take his wife on holiday over Christmas and he was going to turn off his email and his phone for 2 weeks. And his colleagues at work could not believe this, that a guy who'd not had a holiday in 5 years and who was working in 3 intercontinental time zones could actually turn off his phone and ignore his email for 2 weeks over Christmas and spend time with his wife and his daughter. So that, I suppose, was part of what I began to realize freedom and joy could mean for CEOs of businesses, where now they could change it to what they'd really intended, that the business should serve them. And then they could have the personal resources and resilience and capacity to care for those people that are most important to them. And for many of them, they'd started their business with some kind of personal mission to change the world, build a better mousetrap, or to have the best team in the world, or whatever it was. But somehow they'd lost themselves on the way.
And I'd like you to go into more detail about this. Somewhere along the line, they lost the way. You mentioned that there's a community that you have that people then enter into when they become part of this CEO Growth Academy. How does that peer group help people to identify those points where, I'm going to use an old expression, where instead of the dog wagging the tail is wagging the dog?
Well, one of the things that we do every time we meet as a group is do what we call a temperature check. So we ask each person to write up on the board, out of 10, in that moment, how they feel about themselves, their family, and their business. And when people first join the group, they want to strut their stuff a little bit, and they say sort of 8, 9, 7, whatever. And then they see that people who've been in the group longer are quite happy to put 5, 3, -2, whatever it is. And they start to realize they don't have to pretend here. And so what usually happens is after they've been in the group 3 or 4 months, their scores start to fall. Is that a failure of the group? No, it's actually the point of which they can start to grapple with the truth of their situation, the truth of what's really going on. And then we ask people in the group to ask one question of another group member about their scores. So it's not me as the chair saying, I'm going to call you out. It's somebody else who's been living the same kind of life as a CEO who says to you, okay, I can see that you got a 3 for yourself, a 10 for the business, and a 5 for your family. Why are you feeling so bad when your business is succeeding? And then the truth starts to come out.
And
Or
I want to stop you there because that is so important. Why do people feel so bad when the business, which is the purpose of what they wanted to do in the first place, is succeeding, but they feel that there's an incongruence there?
yeah, well, the reasons can be all sorts of things, but sometimes it's just they are endlessly tired, bad-tempered, exhausted, um, or they they came into the room that morning and they'd had a big row with their wife, and so they're feeling pretty lousy about themselves. So it could be an incident or it could be something systemic, but the numbers allow us to have those kinds of conversations. There's one guy that I was working with, and he said, well, my business is going fine, but I'm just bored. I feel a 3 because I'm just bored. I haven't done anything interesting and new. So what we all did was we took him on a journey. I said, look, what you need to do is have more parties because actually he's a very gregarious guy and he just stopped having parties. So we found all sorts of excuses for him to organize parties. And he came back and I said, the goal you've got is to have a big party every single term, every single season. And he started doing that and he was energized by organizing them, gathering people together. And yeah, it just got him back into being interested again. Um, and then out of that, he started to do triathlon running and trained as an opera singer. And, his business is still growing and successful. And he's no longer bored because it's not the only thing in his life.
You see, this is the element that I'd like again for you to unpack. This is so interesting. How important is play in business to actually unlock that energy that I can't believe that it was just this one person, the play that we should have in a professional setting? I'd like you to explain a little bit about that.
Well, I can give you three quite specific examples. So one of the things that we have done with our CEOs is a process called Lego Serious Play. I'm not making it up. You can buy kits from Lego so that executives can do serious play. Wonderful process because now they can describe their problems by building something out of Lego rather than trying to intellectualize it. And people get extraordinary perspectives. So that's one example. The second is there are many people who I say, look, you are so much driven by must, should, ought that actually you've got no freedom in your life at all. So I want you to start to move from must, should, ought to actually dream about what you'd love to do, what would be fun. And part of this came out of my own experience where I really struggled to dream about stuff that I'd love to do because there was a bit of me which felt I didn't deserve to have good things or have a good time. And the thing that I realized I'd always wanted to do, and this was at the tender age of 50, 55, I realized what I always really wanted to do was to do windsurfing. So we were going on holiday to Lanzarote and I went windsurfing. And I thought, it's extraordinary extravagance. But I did it. My wife encouraged me to do it. I did this thing which I've been dreaming of doing for years, but never really felt that I could do. So it's part of that dreaming, bringing the dreaming back into people's lives. And the third thing, which I think is incredibly powerful, which we've done with a number of groups, is teach them the technique of dramatic improvisation. Because actually, when you're running a business, most of the time you are improvising, but nobody teaches you to improvise. And if you go and join an improvisation workshop, you learn about how to respond in the moment. You learn about how to take whatever is offered you by the other person in the improvisation you're doing. You learn about how to say both and rather than either or yes, but. And again, very playful, but opens up something extraordinary in people. And I've seen people who are deeply introverted and very fearful, as they learn improvisation, find a whole new way of being as a leader and relating to people in their organizations. So Lego Serious Play. For me, it was windsurfing, kite surfing, and improvisation.
And thinking about this theme of improvisation, I was listening to a podcast last night, which I do a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts as opposed to mainstream media. And there was a former Navy SEAL. This was on the Jordan B. Peterson podcast. And he was talking about the fact that you can make all the best plans, but when you go into battle, when you go into combat, you have to improvise. because you don't know what your opponent is going to be doing until you're there. You don't know. And I love the fact that you actually highlight this in your environment, in your CEO Growth Academy, because this improvisation, he was talking about the fact that you listen with the intent of understanding that transcends your usual approach to how you would set a prescribed series of thoughts and then into the behaviors and actions that you would then usually go into. And it completely flips it on its head. And you keep an open mind and you keep the outcome will be what it will be, but you know that you're going to make the best decisions with the tools available that you have at the time. And only time will tell with the information that you had at that precise moment if they were good or bad. But you can only act on that basis. And this improvisation and the quality of what you're talking about is very interesting. If you can, I'd like you to unpack a little bit more about the results and the ways in which people are benefiting from this practiced improv that then can be taken back into the workplace.
So many of the people I work with, they've come into their leadership positions through a professional route, whether it's as a technologist or an accountant or as a marketeer or HR professional. They've started their lives where they are valued for their technical skill. And they can be very confident about their technical skill. But now they're asking to lead and manage in a context where it's not just about doing the stuff they've always done. It's about recognizing that when they show up in the morning, they have no idea what to expect. And in fact, if they turn up in the morning and they have an expectation about what's going to happen, then they're already wrong-footed when they turn up. And so improvisation is saying, I'm assuming that I do not know what's going to happen next. And the improvisation techniques help you to stay in the moment, to listen hard to what's going on with the other party, and then to respond in a additive, constructive way to build on what the other person is doing or saying to create something more. Because classically, what we've been trained as managers is, as managers, we are meant to be preventing deviance, meant getting people to do what they're meant to do. But in improv, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to see what shows up and how can we build something more exciting and more powerful by saying yes and. And now, when you go into a situation, you're not going to a situation fearful about whether you can control everything that's going on. You're going into a situation confident that whatever is thrown at you, you can respond in a constructive, additive, supportive, creative way. And that then enables people to, ironically, show up much more as their authentic self. They're able to show up as who they really are because they don't have to go into a situation believing that the only way to succeed is to conform with whatever the culture or the organization says they should do. Now, I've met CEOs who say, who tell me I should never admit that I'm wrong, or I should never admit I don't know what to do. And I say to them, that is rubbish. We're in a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. The most powerful thing you can do as a leader is offer the vulnerability to say, I don't know what's going on here. Let's find out together how we can deal with it. Because the lie that you really do know or you really can control the situation is just a deception in so many cases. So I've come onto this podcast with you, Deborah, and I had no idea what you're going to ask me. I had no idea how personal you're going to be. You and I have had two conversations in the past, and I'm just here trying to build on the provocative, curious questions that you're bringing to me.
And that's the thing with this podcast. I don't know what I'm going to ask either. And so, with the benefit of listening with the intent of understanding of how I can bring to our audience the greatest value that you can bring within this podcast, I trust the fact and I improvise all the time with if I'm asking a question, it will then prompt a response from my guest that's then going to provide value. If I wrote a lot of scripted questions down, it's going to be notable in that the fact that this format's going to be very choppy and very disconnected. And I chose right from the start to sharpen up my act and actually listen with the intent of thinking, that is great. And I have never once not been able to ask a question in relation to something that I felt of value to my guest. And I think that just again shows the authenticity of both of us here on the podcast is that we are improvising all the way through, but we're having a dance. We're dancing with each other in a metaphoric way. And you're picking out something that I'm saying, and I'm picking out something that you're saying. And it's very fluid and organic and natural. And if it wasn't, it would be far more staccato and much
Yeah.
more staged. And that's not how I wanted to put that across. So thank you for noticing because,
Talk about dance.
you
Yeah.
know, yeah.
My wife is a huge fan of Strictly Come Dancing, and she's actually quite a good dancer. And I thought, I'll do her a huge favor. I'll book us some dance classes. Um, but the truth was, I could not match how she was dancing. And when you go to formal dance classes, the man is supposed to lead, and she is not used to following somebody who can't dance. So it sort of highlighted the disconnect of our desire and our commitment to the discipline of actually changing roles and operating in a different environment.
And that's the thing, isn't it? With a team, with everybody coming from a different perspective, but nobody really shows up to do a bad job. We're all going to try and do our very best. I mean, you do get the odd toxic person, but on the whole, we're all trying to do the best that we can. And therefore, if we feel listened to, heard, and valued, then we can start to give of ourselves for the benefit of all. And one of the things I'd like to center on as well is that you mentioned love when you wrote a little bit about yourself around that love element that's then the strength that can bond teams together for high performance all the way through. I'd just like you to go into that. If somebody's thinking, love, really? What's that all about? I'd just like you to go through that in more
We're not
detail.
well served in the English language with the word love. I think it's there are other languages where there's a much richer set of words with which you can describe the way you relate to somebody in a positive way. And I use love quite provocatively, but often a better word is kindness, or a better word is patience, or a better word is serving, or a better word is caring. So it's not, all not always about getting loved up and sitting there, glowing at somebody else's presence. Sometimes it is. And one of the things that I brought into my practice, which quite surprised me with its power, there's a book that many of you may have heard of called The Five Love Languages by a guy called Chapman. And he identifies that people have a preference to one way of experiencing love. And he talks about those who really respond to physical touch, those who respond to quality time, those who respond to gifts, those who respond to affirmation, and those who respond to acts of service. And if you actually think about people in your team, you can often detect what their preferred love languages is because they tend to offer that love to other people if they're trying to engage with them. So for me, acts of service really matter and quality time really matters. So when my wife and I started dating, accidentally, she would produce me a lovely meal whenever I came, um, and a really cozy environment, and the acts of service where she produced this wonderful meal for me, and then we spent time together over a meal. That was pressing all of my love buttons. For her, her love languages are words of affirmation and physical touch. So that's what she needed, and more than anything else. And so as I started to talk about, what I really appreciate about who she was, um, and we got closer together, then that fired her up. But in a Zoom world, it's really quite hard to offer physical touch. It's really quite hard to offer quality time. And so many people for whom those love languages are very important are not feeling valued in this world. And even it can be hard to offer acts of service to people in a Zoom world. So I think we need to notice that in order for people to hear and feel and know that they are loved, we need to feed them with the love language that they understand, not just feed them with the love language we find easiest to offer.
Very interesting. And thank you, because I hadn't really joined up the dots from a Zoom perspective, because it's a very comfortable media for me, in fact, more comfortable than face to face, which says a lot about my own personality, and my own love language, because I must be somebody that likes affirmation. And from that perspective, I can often feel an energy from the other person on the Zoom call. And maybe that's something that I'm perceiving that I feel is gratifying as well. So it's very interesting that you say that, and very important, but obviously has to be appropriate within the workplace as to how one adopts something which is more of a physical nature. It could be a pat on the back, or a tap on the shoulder or something,
Well, it
if
doesn't necessarily
it's
have to involve
appropriate.
contact. No. So if somebody really values physical touch, then maybe the thing that makes the most difference is for them to have a very comfy chair and a very cozy environment around them and a highly tactile workspace. So, your classic office furniture where you sit on a hard chair with a hard desk and a hard screen, for them, they feel much more loved if they could sit on a sofa, wrapped up in a rug, you know, with their dog nestling up against them. Now they'd feel loved. The physical touch doesn't necessarily mean contact from their employer.
Very good. You know what? This is just wonderful, learning about all of us and our different ways, etc. And it's one thing that I've always said. Would I prefer to think that I'm right, or would I prefer to have everything around me tell me that I'm doing the right thing? And there's a subtle difference, and just those nuances of how to actually motivate and identify with people what their love language is back into the workplace, I think is absolutely brilliant, because at the end of the day, we don't stop being us when we go to work. It's obviously something that we're still there with all of our predilections, etc., and our behaviors. Whether they serve us or not is a different matter. And I'm sure that's what you go into with people as well within the CEO Growth Academy. Very often people say, yeah, but this is all softly, softly. What can actually happen to bottom line business results when people get this right?
I think there are three things that I would point to. One is if you as a leader are operating to your strengths, feeling that freedom and joy, you will make better decisions. And you'll be engaging other people to support you to make better decisions. When you have cultures of fear and toil and slavery, then you don't have an ecosystem of support. You don't have the kind of collaboration that can bring wonderful things to light. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that you start to really understand what success looks like. Many of the CEOs who came to me and wanted to start working with me said, I'd say, so what are you trying to do? And they would come back with one of two numbers. I want to hit this turnover number, or I want to sell my business for this number of millions of pounds. And they had defined success in that very, very crude metric. But as we worked together, they started to realize that there had to be a bigger why than that. And they also started to realize that maybe hitting that number involved costs that were unacceptable to them. The breakdown of their marriage or the loss of their health or their alienation of their children. So they would start to redefine what success was. And by redefining what success was, actually, they were able to be truly successful rather than hit some benchmark, which means they could brag about what they sold their business for, at the squash club or on their ocean-going yacht. And then the third thing is they began to realize that a lot of their success could be measured by the degree to which they made other people successful around them. And that became transformative because now they were moving from a language of success to a language of significance. And we would quite often do an exercise where we would celebrate somebody's birthday by going around to a set of their colleagues and getting them to record things about how had they as a leader impacted their lives. And these people would be blown away by people who said, I worked for you 10 years ago and now this is my life because of what you did for me. Or I've worked here for the last 5 years and I've gone from here to there. Or suddenly they could start to see that significance is something that's priceless and perhaps is beyond success.
I think that's a wonderful place to stop the show today because it encapsulates so beautifully the work that you do, not just for those that you work with on a one-to-one basis, but also throughout their ecosystems, throughout their businesses, throughout their social and personal lives. I think that this has a transformative, as you say, effect, not just from, as I say, the workplace, but in a far broader sense as well. So, Charles, thank you. How can people get hold of you?
Well, the easiest way to get hold of me is to go to portfolioexecutive.biz or ceogrowth.biz or find me on LinkedIn as Charles McLachlan. And I would love to be in touch with anybody. I have learned that it's always worth having that first 30-minute conversation because by being curious and by being generous, extraordinary things happen.
Thank you. Beautifully said. And everybody that is listening, if this resonates, please do be in touch with Charles. He's a very erudite man, and he also puts things in simple terms, non-judgmental, which is so important in this type of work, and trustworthy, because again, you've got to be in safe and trusting hands to be able to get the very best out of this type of program. So again, Charles, thank you for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you, Deborah, for the opportunity to share with you and also to see the way that a podcast can function, which is based on improvisation.
Yes, indeed. Wonderful. And everybody listening, thank you so much for tuning in. It's always a delight to have you. Without you, we wouldn't be here. So truly appreciate it. And if you're new to the show, welcome. Please do look at the other episodes as well on the channel. Like, subscribe, and comment. We always love to hear what you have to say, and share, because this may well resonate with somebody that could really value this amazing opportunity to work with Charles and become the absolute best that they've always known they could be. They just need to unlock a few tweaks and unlock a few doors there. So until next time, everybody, take care and see you all again very soon. Bye bye now.
Thank you.